Hello everyone! Methinks it's time for a reading update. It's been a couple months since the last one, so here are a few books that I've read recently, and it really is a few. This isn't going to be like what else I saw in September. We're not going to be covering 20 books in one video. First on the docket is The Distance Between Us by Kasie West. In the past, I've spoken positively of her young adult novels, and this was just as agreeable as the others. It's a poor girl, rich boy romance where the protagonist works in her mom's struggling, creepy collectible doll shop. I picked this one because I needed something to read in a waiting room for an hour, and the book I had planned all along to bring with me, I suddenly decided, you know what, I'm not enjoying this, I don't like the author's opinions, and so I'm going to stop reading it. And so I needed something else in a pinch. I went on Overdrive, looked at what was available on my wish list, and this was, so I went for it. And it turned out to be just the thing. Compared to some other Kasie West books I've read, I'd probably rate it lower, but it was charming nonetheless. Next up was I, Robot, but after that I read Thousand Pieces of Gold by Ruthanne McCunn. I sure hope I'm saying that right. I watched the movie starring Rosalind Chow a couple years ago, and that led me to the book, which is a so-called biographical novel set in the late 19th century about a teenage girl in China who's sold into slavery by her father and eventually ends up in America's Wild West. As the adaptation did, the book does contain mature content. She endures terrible things, but it's handled tastefully within the context of the story. What I enjoyed is that, in spite of everything, the book is refreshingly optimistic. I loved the character's resilience, her ingenuity, and her lightness of spirit. Despite all she went through, in her adult life, she was able to laugh freely. It's also a wonderful love story, although it's not a romance. It doesn't focus on the falling in love part as romances do. And I was shocked to find out that the movie essentially only covered the first half of the book, and there were several changes as well. I think I enjoyed the book more. Yeah, I liked the book better. The stuff nearer the end is actually what I found most emotional. I'm kind of surprised. I don't know if for some reason people have turned on the book or something, but it used to be highly regarded and now it's got only a 3.8 out of 5 on Goodreads. I gave it 5 stars because I just found it that powerful. Third on the list is a collection titled Beware. R.L. Stine picks his favorite scary stories. Here's some anecdotal history. I was not allowed to read R.L. Stine's Goosebumps books when I was a little kid. They were too scary. However, my school bus buddy was. She was a year older than me, and she got on the bus just a couple stops after I did, and we would sit together and read the whole ride to school. I know, so nerdy. Sometimes, depending on what she was reading and depending on what I was reading, I would read her book over her shoulder. And sometimes they were Goosebumps books. I know, breaking all the rules. Fast forward to last year, I had the opportunity to take some masterclass courses online, and despite the fact that I'd never read more than a couple of his books, and I don't have much interest in writing for kids, I decided to give R.L. Stine Teaches Writing for Young Audiences a try. And I loved it. It was, without question, my favorite course. Why? Because despite appearances and preconceived notions, it turns out R.L. Stine is a perfectly normal guy, and he's hilarious. I loved his sense of humor. He's weird, but it's my kind of weird, and he has great taste in movies, and I just felt like, oh, this guy, he's a kindred spirit. Somehow, I don't remember how, this collection ended up on one of my library lists. And with fall approaching, September seemed just the right time to check it out, so I did. Well, I was pleasantly surprised. It contains short stories, poems, excerpts, modernized retellings and one comic, all handpicked by Stine, and there were very few selections I didn't like. I'm not sure who it's for. I read it, and I'm a grown-up. Some of the stories get quite dark, even grisly, so I would be careful about letting a child read it. Stine's introductions, though, he introduces each piece, and the introductions address the reader as if the reader is a child, so the target age is probably 10 to 12? A number of the selections are a combination of scary and funny, which I felt made them that much more enjoyable. It's fun to get chills and break out in goosebumps, but be chuckling at the same time. He includes 2 works of his own, which I don't fault him for, plus 2 stories he's retold in modern language that will be easier for younger audiences. The first story in the collection is The Black Ferris by Ray Bradbury, which became Something Wicked This Way Comes. Stine says some lovely things about what a revelation his first experience reading Bradbury was. Having read both the novel and now the original short story, I think the novel is a vast improvement on both the writing and the concept. The only thing is that it's a pity the illustration provided kind of spoils the story. The illustration appears before the short story, and it gives away the ending. There is an illustration for each entry, I believe, and usually they don't give it away like that. Some of the stories are quite sophisticated, others are heart-stoppingly gruesome, no matter what age you are. So overall, I would say it's a great collection, and Stine's taste in spooky stories seems to be as good as his taste in monster movies. Shortly after that, I began Doomsday Book by Connie Willis, which I thought was excellent, one of the best time travel efforts I've encountered. Granted, I only like time travel in small doses. It was even better because I didn't bother to look at what it was about before I started reading it, and so I had no idea it was going to be about viral pandemics unfolding simultaneously in the past and the present, which is actually the future. A little background may be pertinent here. I have wanted to read Connie Willis's most famous book, To Say Nothing of the Dog, for a couple years, but I decided to read 3 Men in a Boat, To Say Nothing of the Dog, by Jerome K. Jerome first, because To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis is kind of a tribute to it, and B, because Doomsday Book is first in her Oxford time travel series, and To Say Nothing of the Dog is second, I decided to read them in proper order. As far as I know, it's not necessary, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. And as it turns out, I loved Doomsday Book. It's the kind of plot that begins with a risky endeavor that gets off on the wrong foot, and then you're just waiting for things to go awry, which they inevitably do, but then they get even worse than you anticipated. At first I was put off by her inclusion of so many apparently insignificant details. The play-by-plays of every little action and every little thing felt almost pedantic. It was so frustrating at first that I was complaining to my mom, like, the hook here is really interesting, but man, just get to the point. I don't need to know all this stuff. I don't care. It's not important. But as I continued reading, it became clear that she had done that on purpose, that she mentioned these things so that later on, when they popped up again with new significance, the reader would recognize them and say, oh, that's that thing, that's that person, I remember that. And that was satisfying. Did it always pay off? No, I don't think so. But it did. There was a fulfillment to it. Even if it did make the book, 600 pages long, and it only took me a week and a half to read, but There were times where I was like, just keep on going! As a side note, I don't know if it was Willis's intent to draw attention to this or not. I suspect it was. But I became interested in the ecclesiastical contrasts she depicted. The manufactured, tacky, watered-down religion of the present day, 2050, the ornamental, elitist, by-rote religion of the Middle Ages, and the simple, humble, unwavering faith of Father Roach. For me, a Doomsday book was great science fiction, great historical fiction, and great personal drama. There were characters I became attached to, so then it was difficult to see them suffer grief or pain. If you don't like gross things, you might want to give it a pass. There was a lot of disgusting detail. It's dark and heavy, but I found it so interesting and suspenseful. It was a page-turner. And it wasn't devoid of humor, either. One of my favorite characters was Colin, who's this delightful kid who ends up quarantined at the university. And he's intelligent, his energy is limitless, his help is immeasurable, and he added some much-needed, but not overdone, comic relief. It was great. The whole experience was so positive that, of course, it made me even more eager to read To Say Nothing of the Dog, and curious because I knew it was supposed to be a comedy, so right away I put a hold on it. I then moved on to book number 5, The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, an eerie science fiction novel that was adapted as Village of the Damned in 1960, which was then remade in 1995. I've seen the 1960 movie. It's okay. Not a favorite of mine. I definitely wanted to read the book, though, because John Wyndham is 2 for 2 for me. I loved The Day of the Triffids, really enjoyed The Kraken Wakes, so I wanted to read this book. This book, well, I'm not sure if it's as famous as The Day of the Triffids. No, they're probably neck and neck. And I really liked this as well, so now he's 3 for 3 for me. What everyone thinks of when the movie comes up is the creepy children. But in the book, it was the setup that I loved, with the mysterious day-out period befalling this poky little English town of Midwich. And then there's the appearance of life returning to normal before the female residents discover that the nightmare has only just begun. The drawback, and I've noticed this with Wyndham's other books, is that there is a tendency to get talky. One character in this is particularly prone to bloviate, to other characters' bewilderment and chagrin, and those passages threaten to bog down an otherwise snappy reading experience, and he bloviates a lot in the second half. I don't want to say... bloviate sounds so negative. He has a tendency to pontificate, theorize, monologue. At least the content of those monologues is usually interesting, as long as they aren't too dense. And I think Wyndham is using this character as a mouthpiece to explore certain concepts and ideas, and that's fine. It's just... it's a little hard to get through sometimes when you're like, yeah, but what's going on? Like, what's happening in the town? What's happening with the kids? I want to read action and dialogue. It also worked in the book's favor that I could barely remember anything about the movie's plot after a certain point, including how the whole thing turned out. So the what's going to happen question really kept me going through some of those passages that were a little on the slower side. After that, I was just about to begin reading something else when I got an email notification that my hold on To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis had come in, so I started reading that instead. I am currently on chapter 3, and it's great, totally different in tone, and I love what she's doing with the writing. The main character is suffering from advanced time lag, which is an illness you get from making too many jumps into the past in a short span of time. The narrative voice is just delightful. The character is suffering from advanced time lag, sickness you get from making too many jumps in a short span of time, and one of the symptoms is that your language becomes more flowery and exaggerated. So he's going around talking like a Victorian, and so they decide to send him to the late Victorian era for some recuperation, where he won't be bothered. And their reasoning is, it'll be great, he'll fit right in. But there's also something that they need him to do while he's there. I haven't figured that out yet because I'm only on chapter 3, but I am loving it so far. Maybe I'll have finished it by the time I post this. Oh dear. So I filmed that on October 3rd, and that was 3 weeks ago. I've been waiting to post this video until I could provide an update after finishing the book, which I only just did on October 19th. And now I kind of don't want to do an update because while the vast majority of readers love To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis, I did not. Nobody will be more surprised by this than I am. I'm downright bewildered because it has so much to recommend it, so much that's right up my alley, so much that I do like. Maybe the problem is that I read it too soon after reading Doomsday book, which I found so absorbing and intense and innovative. While To Say Nothing of the Dog was far more fun and just as clever, it just didn't grab me the same way. And the stylistic things that initially bothered me about Doomsday book, which I did come to forgive, seemed much more conspicuous here. To put it bluntly, this book felt so bloated to me, far longer than it needed to be, with an excessive amount of play-by-plays and pedantic observations, running gags that wore out their welcome, and a couple predictable twists that the main characters took a maddeningly long time to figure out. I'm not saying it was bad, I'm not saying I didn't like it. The fish out of water in the Victorian-era humor was great. The dire threat of the outcome of World War II changing was something I really enjoyed and hadn't expected. The multitude of classic mystery novel references was a lot of fun. Although, wow, she just spoils things willy-nilly. And there's a number of other things that were just fine. But the whole thing was so drawn out, and it seemed so needless, that after a certain point, I was just ready for it to be over. And the longer it took to reach a conclusion, the more restless I became. So while I liked it, I didn't love it. I did find out that there are 2 more sequels in the series, sequels of sorts, and the blurbs make them sound really interesting. I would really like to read them. I do hesitate because, well, certainly I'm not going to be reading them soon. I need to move on to some other things, let some time go by, but those are on the horizon. I enjoyed both of these books, Doomsday book and To Say Nothing of the Dog, and by the way, reading 3 Men in a Boat, To Say Nothing of the Dog, is not necessary, I would say, to enjoying Connie Willis's book, but it did make it a little more fun to be able to recognize references and commonalities. I was just surprised that that part of the story was so short. Anyway, back to the original video. And that's what I've been reading lately. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of any of these titles if you're familiar with them. And go ahead and share what you've been reading lately in the comments below. Stay tuned for another video later this week. I was going to say something else, but I forgot what it was. Thanks for watching.